Thank you for coming to our PowerPoint today on Brazil. As you can see, this was put together with the help of Jeff, Carolyn, Brandon, which is myself, Matt, and Taylor. So today in this PowerPoint, we're going to go over Brazil, its economy a little bit, how it does business, and learn a little bit more about the country. So let's jump right in. First, let's go over Geert Hofstede's cultural dimensions. So, like I said, Geert Hofstede was a man who put together a way to compare two countries and how they do business. On the left, in the box on the bottom, we can see the 6 categories that he created to compare two countries. At the top, going down, we have power index, individualism versus collectivism, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity index, long-term versus short-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. Going over Brazil quick, its greatest differences are power distance, individualism, and uncertainty avoidance. And its lowest score is long-term versus short-term orientation. So this is a great way to, if you're wondering how, as it says there, if you're wondering how two countries do business, using these 6 categories, you can get a feel for what that might be without even having to interact with somebody in those countries, without having to go there. It's a great tool. It's critical as we talk about international business to understand the differences in culture if we're going to do business internationally. We don't have to understand every tiny little difference when it comes to another country's culture, but it is important to understand the big things that make us differ, because that's the good thing about the world is we're all different, and when we come together we can make great things happen. But it is important to understand the bigger things that make us different in order to avoid somebody taking offense to something or a big misunderstanding, things of that nature. In Brazil specifically, a couple of those cultural things I was just referencing are that in Brazil, upper management is expected to lead business conversations, whether that be a negotiation or just a general discussion. Um, there is lots of passion in these conversations. It's important for people doing business with those in Brazil or those from Brazil to understand that this passion is just a part of how they speak, how they do business, and we shouldn't mistake it for them trying to go after somebody or to make offense. Another thing you want to make sure to do is bring a translator, unless you're confident enough in your language skills uh, to do it yourself, but that's important as well so that we don't get anything mixed up. Brazil's government is a federal presidential republic, which means essentially that it's a federation of states, and to be specific, there's 26 states in Brazil, with a republican form of central government. Currently, their president is conservative, and their economy is in a recession. Not a wonderful time in Brazil's history. As we can see there, violence and corruption are pretty widespread throughout the country, but as we'll talk about later in the PowerPoint, they are trying to come out of it. So the Economic Freedom Index is a measure of overall economic freedom throughout 12 different categories. As we can see here, we have financial freedom, investment freedom, trade freedom, monetary freedom, labor freedom, business freedom, fiscal health, government spending, government integrity, tax burden, judicial effectiveness, and property rights. It's a lot of categories. Brazil, according to all these categories, overall is ranked 144th in the world, which is not great. But like I said, they're looking towards the future, and they're hoping for good times to come, and there's good signals of that. Okay, so to start a business in Brazil, it's pretty difficult. And putting this together and going over this PowerPoint, you'll kind of get the feel that Brazil may have brought on some of this economic hardship to themselves. As we see here, it's difficult to start a business in Brazil. There are a lot of hoops to jump through. Up at the top there, we see that Brazil ranks 124th out of 190 countries on the ease of doing business scale. So if you want to start a business there, first of all, I don't know why you would want to if there's 123 other countries out there where it would be easier to do so. But if you do want to start a business in Brazil, it's going to be tough. But because of how poorly their economies have been doing, they've been easing up on restrictions and allowing people to come in and sell their product and make their product a whole lot easier. So there are good times ahead, as I've mentioned now. So the most favored nation status is a status given from one country to another that essentially grants them the best possible trade deals. It's really good if you want to establish a long-term relationship with a country. When we look at the World Trade Organization, all member countries are have the most favored nation status amongst each other. Now, trade agreements, Brazil is not involved in too many trade agreements. They are a member of the World Trade Organization, have been since the 90s, but they're also involved in a trade agreement called the Mercosur, and that's an agreement with Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Venezuela. But other than that, they're not in any other trade agreements. Foreign direct investment is a measure of how many foreign companies invest in a country. As I mentioned earlier, it's pretty tough right now to get into Brazil and do business. Because of that, their foreign direct investment, or FDI, has been declining in recent years. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, though, because of that, they're trying to ease up on those restrictions. They're trying to ease up on the hoops you have to jump through in order to promote more investment in their country and grow their economy and come out of this recession that they've been in. GDP and GNI. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It's been declining for a few years now. GNI stands for Gross National Income, and we can see their PPP as well on that graph. Purchasing Power Parity is what that stands for. Compared to the United States, it's pretty weak. But what both of those things combined, GNI and PPP, do is they make it easier for companies to keep product and material local and boost their local economy because it's easier to keep costs lower by doing that. In terms of Brazil's currency and their exchange rate, in recent years, corruption throughout the government of Brazil has really taken a toll on the Brazilian real. It has dropped its value significantly. However, they are trying to come out of this economic downturn um, and look forward to the future. So a couple of products that we thought might be good to start in Brazil, good to base a company off of in Brazil. Our first, donuts. Number one, because who doesn't like donuts? Number two, because the donut market in Brazil, there's not a whole lot of players in that industry. As we can see there, Dunkin' Donuts is the biggest name. It is, I mean, it just itself is a huge name. It controls 40% of the market, if not more. And then the rest, there's really no other big brand name there that we'd have to compete with. We would have an advantage there in marketing, and our brand could be seen as American. Moving on to more details on the donut business. The things we'd need would be employees, obviously. We could offer things such as gluten-free donuts, um, different options that have come up in recent years to be, to go along with the healthier trends that we're seeing in America. Some things that we saw that might take away from our business. This could be seen as a fad, could be seen as just something cool that you want to buy for a month or two and then forget about it. As well as villages, small, poorer villages scattered throughout Brazil. One thing that the villagers commonly make are baked goods in order to make money for themselves. And so it would be hard to break through that market because that's a pretty big share in and of itself. In terms of how we'd get things there, the baking materials we could source from Brazil domestically. However, the machines that we would need to make the donuts, we would probably want to import. It would be very easy to copy the business, just as it would be very easy for us ourselves to go in there and start making donuts. The way we'd get money to fund this project would be through business funds or corporate investments. Second product is baby clothes. We would play here to the idea that e-commerce is the way people buy things now instead of, brick and mortar stores. Biggest companies we'd have to compete with are Johnson & Johnson and B2 Brazil. We would have a competitive advantage in marketing and local sourcing. The things we would need are employees, obviously. It would be a lot easier if we could set up an e-commerce store instead. Need less people on site. Who knows if we'd have a site at all. Some issues that we might run into would be the Brazilian rejection of American style clothes. Don't know what that would look like, but it's a potential that we talked about. And also whether or not Brazil is ready to go full e-commerce versus a brick and mortar store. If we were to offer fully e-commerce, don't know how they'd respond to that, if that would be well or not. In terms of the materials we need, we could source those from Brazil, but again, we need to import the machines. If we were to stick with American quality, it would be pretty low to imitate. We would get our funds from business funds or corporate investments. Last product is a travel application. Cheap to do, not really too many big names there, and pretty unique. We would need to help us, app builders, obviously, tech people who know what they're doing. Some issues we might run into when trying to grow this service would be a desire to go out and explore rather than and be outside rather than sit in on your smartphone and look at things on our app. We'd also want to make sure our information is correct so that we don't offend anybody and we don't misinform anybody, and that it caters to Brazilian standards. One thing we would need to figure out is app development, whether we would need a brick and mortar location in Brazil to do that, or if we'd want to source that from the US. It wouldn't be too hard to imitate us, but it wouldn't be too easy either. And same as the other two products, we would get our funds from business funds and corporate investments. And here are our references. Thank you for coming to our slideshow today, our PowerPoint. Hope you learned a little bit more about Brazil and how you can do business better there and some products that might work out there. Thank you.